One, we're back. David, like we were saying. So, Austin, perhaps, maybe Puerto Rico, maybe Mars. Who knows where you are?
Yeah, Austin at the moment. It's a good place to be these days. The growth in the tech sector here has just been insane the last few years. So it feels really good to be surrounded by a lot of the people doing the top robotics, AI, space technology. So yeah, that's what I love.
Amazing. So I was looking through my collection of videos and interviews. You and I had done something. I don't know if you remember, but it was a while ago. It was
Yep.
maybe 3, 4 years ago. So I could put a link to that, and in there we covered kind of your backstory and all of that, right? But
Sure.
I would maybe let's just dive into the deep end. I want to talk about, I guess, what's keeping you excited nowadays. I know a lot about Morpheus as well, but I would love to do a little bit of a deep dive there, and also kind of talk about what else you're working on, what other things you mentioned robotics, another passion of
Sure.
mine. But I would love to maybe start there. Yeah, tell the world about Morpheus.
Sure. I mean, the core concept is I really want to own my AI. I was just tweeting about this the other day. Some of the models have reached like 140 IQ. I really want that AI working on my behalf as
Mm,
opposed to against me or for some third party, right? So the idea of having a truly personal AI that I own with my private key, I think is the important concept for us having a good future and a lot of that value flowing to the individual as opposed to some big tech company. So that was, when I read the Morpheus white paper in 2023, I found that really inspiring. It's like, yep, freedom of intelligence. That's what we need. So last 2 years, it's all been built out. Now it's operating at scale. People are using all the open source models. I don't know if you saw the survey last week, but open source AI models are now 30% of the market share. If you look
really
at tokens
interesting.
going over Open Router, that's from up from 14% 6 months ago. So the open
Hmm.
source models are sort of eating the market, and my expectation is they'll be the vast majority of the market in the next year, couple years. And it's just they're so much cheaper, right? You don't have to pay some company a big markup. And as the benchmarks have sort of, you know, gotten to the point where the AI for open source is just as good, it's like, why not? Why would I pay the 5x markup to use the proprietary version? So it's validating like that. Those are the things we were saying 2 years ago is like open source is going to win. Open systems tend to outperform closed systems. And here we are. So,
I
yeah,
love it. I love it. Hey, one thing. So we were just commenting, I guess, before I hit the record button, how about our jackets. The DCG event that we attended. What was it, a year ago? When the last time I saw you, in California. So we got a front row seat to also hear about another company or organization or community called BitTensor. How do you compare, I guess, to BitTensor and like, can you kind of talk through that a little bit?
sure. Yeah, I have a lot of the friends in the BitTensor community, and I think of them on the supply side.
Okay.
So people are using BitTensor subnets to train models, to provide inference, to supply something. That's how they frame themselves is they are a creator of digital commodities and they offer those to the world. And Morpheus is more on the demand side. We are driving users to those models, to that inference, right? And it's not just BitTensor. You can think of Venice in the same way, right? They're supplying inference where they've focused on privacy, right? Or confidentiality or anonymity for using the models. And today they're the largest inference provider on the Morpheus router is Venice by far. They've done an amazing job of aggregating a lot of the top models. So but Morpheus is agnostic. If you want to use Akash, you want to use BitTensor, you want to use Venice, knock yourself out, right? Morpheus is just connecting those end users to those models and inference.
Interesting. Wait, back up a bit. So t talk about Venice a little bit, because I was under the impression that Venice was, they obviously had kind of the coming out party where there was this marriage, this relationship between the two. And then it kind of felt like to me that maybe they weren't probably relying on Morpheus at one point, and then they are like, or maybe I'm mistaken. Can you kind of talk about that? Because Venice is run by, Eric Voorhees. I've got it on my phone as well. I think it's a great app. But yeah, can you talk about that?
They're doing great. They're up to I think 1.5 million users. So
Wow.
they are like one of the killer apps on decentralized AI. You know, I can only think of a handful of groups that have reached that same level of adoption and very quickly. So the backstory is Eric Voorhees was an early contributor to Morpheus. He wrote some of the seminal papers like the Yellowstone paper that proposed staking for inference as a concept. And that got built in Morpheus, it got built in Venice. They primarily used Morpheus as a bootstrapping mechanism. So anybody that staked more tokens towards Venice got a free pro account. And what did that do? It gave them a way that was Sybil resistant where people couldn't just, sign up in mass and, be a bunch of bots. So when they did their airdrop, they knew they had a curated group of real people that had at least bought the token and staked it, right? Which they didn't announce ahead of time. I had no idea they were going to do it. And so they took a snapshot on December 31st, of, I think it was 24. And they said, hey, anybody that's been staking to us is going to get that airdrop. And so what it did is it gave them a really authentic community because so many airdrops are, farmed to hell by a million bots, right? That aren't real people and aren't real users, and they're just going to dump the token, right? So they used it as a bootstrapping mechanism. And still today, if you go to the Venice subnet and you stake some Morpheus tokens, you get a free pro account, right? Because Venice embraces crypto payments. You don't just have to pay with a credit card, you can pay with Bitcoin or Ethereum or Morpheus or whatever you want. But then they realized they wanted to focus on providing confidential inference, like really seriously focus on the privacy. And so they ended up becoming an inference provider themselves. So if you go onto the Morpheus router, you can pick a Venice model and say, oh, I want Venice uncensored, or I want, Grok anonymized through Venice, right? So it's not collecting all of my personal data, right? That's really, really cool. And so it's been interesting to see how that's all evolved. Morpheus more focused on the agent and the infrastructure side, Venice having created this beautiful front end application and providing the inference. So, but yeah, I mean, the communities are very tight because a lot of the holders of Morpheus all became holders of Venice, right? And so there's a lot of crossover between the two.
So when you say in Venice, like you said, you have this optionality to kind of pick different LLMs and whatnot. So are you saying that that functionality and that infra is somewhat connected to the Morpheus project?
Yeah. So anybody can run a inference node on the Morpheus peer-to-peer network and offer a model. And so people in the community, since they own a bunch of Venice tokens, and now they've released Diem, right, which gives you this daily allocation of access to the inference on the network, they've set up nodes on Morpheus that are using that inference from Venice to power their agents, to power their applications. And I don't know if you saw my tweet recently, but there's been an explosion in usage of Morpheus inference from a year ago, where it was hobbyists with a node, to when the API gateway got released. And this was sort of an abstraction layer that makes it easy for a developer to just push a button and generate an API key. There was a huge increase, like a hundredfold increase in usage of the network the last 6 months. And then just recently it's broken through the ceiling and it's like gone crazy. And I think that's partly because Morpheus is this marketplace and people can use any model they want and they can route to whatever they want. So yeah, it's exciting to see it really taking off.
Super interesting. And before this show, I was just doing my own homework a little bit. But even like the origin story of Morpheus is quite intriguing, isn't it? And I mean, you seem to, I guess, be one of the characters, but not the people. You're not the guy who made the idea, right? It came to you somehow. Well, can you talk about that a little bit, or is that under? Yeah.
It's well, no, it's been well talked about, and it's very Satoshi-esque. The original authors of the paper called themselves Morpheus, Trinity, and Neo, and they sent around the paper via email to a bunch of people that have been working on this idea of smart agents. Like, how do we connect AI to smart contracts? This is back in 2023, right?
Right.
Which is a really novel concept at the time. People weren't really focused on that use case. And they made a very clear argument. They're like, hey guys, see what you're doing with the smart agents. But if it's got to be run locally, nobody's going to use this thing, right? Almost nobody runs Bitcoin nodes, Ethereum nodes. There's only 20,000 in the world. Even though there's 100 million users in those networks, or hundreds of millions of users, only a few people want to run hardware. And so they made a strong argument that there's got to be a network. There's got to be a way for somebody to run the model and provide it to another person. Because if you look globally, the average person doesn't have a laptop. They don't have a high-end phone. They have a $150 Android phone. That's the average globally. And there's half the population that's below that average. It's working on a $50 Android phone, right? So they're not going to have the hardware to run these most powerful models locally. And so you need a network that has an emission that supports, right, the token emissions that support these people that can provide the inference. And I was like, yeah, that's the right call. Like if we want this to go mainstream and not just be some hobbyists with GPUs, it has to be a real network. And so they proposed Morpheus as that network. And I shared the paper with Eric Voorhees. I'd run into him at Permissionless and caught up with him. If you remember, he gave that big speech, like why crypto matters back in 23.
Yeah.
We were hanging out the day after that. And I told him about the Morpheus paper. He's like, yep, I've been thinking about this same thing. Decentralized intelligence is just as critical as decentralized money. And if you know Eric Voorhees, that is a really powerful statement, right? He's
I
basically
like
spent
that.
his last 15 years helping bootstrap Bitcoin and all these technologies. And so when he decided to go all in, and I was like, yep, this is what I want to spend all my time on, it just sort of snowballed from there. All the old Bitcoiners and Ethereum OGs were like, yes, this is the thing that needs to be worked on. And I think having some Anons proposed it was really by some founder, right? It just became something we all owned, right? Everybody, I think that's really important.
Hey David, I don't know if it was my side or your side, but your audio cut out for a little bit. But I mean, it was minor. But wow, wow, what a crazy story. And then so not only is that you could call it an attack vector, or when you have a founder, it's like one of the best things about Bitcoin is that there is none, right? It's like I feel
Right.
like I own it, just like you said. Um, the story is so beautiful. What about even the way you guys, or the, not you guys, but the way the team and the community went about like bootstrapping the network and bringing it to life was like, I mean, something that I don't think I hear about every day, right? So can you just maybe put a spotlight on that too, and how you guys evolved from like zero to one?
Sure. So I was really attracted in the paper to the idea of a fair launch. So no pre-mine. Anybody could stake their Ethereum towards the project, and that yield, just the yield, would go into protocol and liquidity that would buy up the tokens. So you sort of had this organic way where, like, hey, I'm going to hold ETH anyway. I might as well stake it towards this cool open source project. And it was non-custodial, right? I could withdraw my ETH whenever I wanted. And I had the same amount of ETH as I started with, right? So it became this low risk way to direct my yield towards a project I wanted to support. So $3 billion of ETH have gone through those smart contracts, in and out the last 2 years. And those people are all competing, right? Say you provided 1% of the yield that day, you got 1% of the more emissions. So they're competing to earn those tokens. It's almost like mining, but using your yield to mine. And so I thought that was really novel. And once you do that, you solve a lot of other problems. Now you don't need a treasury. You don't need a grant system. You don't need a DAO. You don't need votes. You don't need governance. People were able to do this all through smart contracts, and the money flowed into buying tokens on Uniswap. So if you were earning the tokens, you wanted to sell them, you didn't need anybody's permission. You just went to Uniswap and you always had a buyer because of that yield constantly buying them up. So I want to say it's been over like 10, $15 million of yield has flowed in and it's constantly buying those tokens. And what happens with those tokens? Half are burned, half are locked up for 16 years. And so you're reducing the supply of Morpheus over time. So over 390,000 tokens have now been burned or locked for this period. And the locked becomes the next block reward in 16 years in the second epoch. So it constantly is recycling and refreshing the tokens without increasing the cap. So it's capped at 42 million. Because of the burn, it'll be something lower than that. But because of the recycling mechanism, there's always a block reward. Like 1,000 years from now, there will still be a block reward being recycled into the system without breaking scarcity. And I thought that combination was brilliant, right? Because Bitcoin has the hard cap, but the emissions run out, right? We're counting on fees to pay miners. In Ethereum, there is no cap, right? So it could technically be infinite, but we're counting on the burning mechanism to limit the inflation in Ethereum. But here you can get both because it has a recycling and a burning mechanism. It respects the hard cap, but it never runs out of a block reward, which I thought was very clever.
I mean, this is yeah, it's so deep. So what's something that you find? I mean, I've probably seen you at every conference I've been to over the last few years, or it feels like it. So we always hang out. But what's the one thing that you find is that people just don't know about the project, or that you're always finding yourself like going, oh, you didn't know that, or is there something I don't know?
Well, most people equate Morpheus just with the inference because that's sort of where it started. But the Morpheus community is contributing to all the major standards around AI on Ethereum. So you look at X402, that's the native way agents are going to pay each other, right? You look at MCP, right? The standard for model communications protocol or model context protocol. That's how the agents are going to talk to servers. Like we've integrated that. We've also contributed to 8004, the new registries where people will register the name and identity of all the agents. That goes live on July 16th, and we've been contributing to that standard. So you'll have the way to discover the agents, the way to pay the agents, the way to communicate the agents, and the inference to power it all sort of wraps together in the Morpheus stack. And we've started describing that as the Morpheus virtual machine. So having that VM that sort of does the compute and the storage and the payments and it's all wrapped together, that's what made Ethereum so powerful was the EVM, right? I could put a smart contract on there and it would run forever, right? I could always come back, pay some gas and interact with it. We need the same approach for agents. So the MVM is built on the EVM and it's doing the same things for smart agents that Ethereum did for smart contracts. That's kind of the broader thing. I don't people haven't fully grokked yet because the pieces have just sort of finally come in place to pull it off.
And where does this all go? Like, is my humanoid in the near future hopefully tied to a Morpheus network? Or do I somehow control its brain because I hold those tokens hidden in its body doesn't know about or something? Or what? How does this play out?
Well, it's a really great question. I think the two will definitely merge, the AI and the robotics side here. And the key is not not your keys, not your AI, right? I want people to individually hold the keys to their data, to their agents, to their robots, to everything associated. And if you look at the experiments recently by Ray Dalio, I don't know if you saw his post about his AI clone that he trained and it can talk to people on his behalf and it feeds back all that information. So he gets a summary of all the conversations. He can scale the number of conversations he has. Jesse Pollock from Base just did the same thing. He created an AI clone, said, "Hey, 1,000 builders want to talk to me. I wish I could take meetings with all of you. Now I can. I've spent 6 months training this AI that's just tuned to talk to builders and advise them and connect them. And hey, the conversations all come back to me. My AI is going to recommend who I should meet with next. So come talk to
Dang.
my AI, and you're getting the lottery ticket to meet with me
Wild.
personally if it's compelling." I think that's a really interesting idea. I think where all this goes is you've got your AI working on your behalf 24/7. While you're sleeping, it's having conversations for you. When you're on vacation, it's navigating all these opportunities. not just talking to other humans, but as everyone has a personal AI, it'll talk to their AI and come back to you with proposals and conclusions and, hey, would you like to do this? And so that's the big payoff is I would like to take, I've spoken to like 140 conferences the last 12 years. I've gone back. I've met something like 10,000 people in
Okay.
person, had a great conversation with them. Maybe we're connected on X or LinkedIn. And I want my A to go back and remind me of the people that I already know who are in the area that I'm working on right now, right? I might have met 10 cybersecurity experts and something comes up. I want to be able to reach out to them, but I can't keep them in short-term memory, right? So having an agent that, forget about making new connections, is just keep it in contact with this huge network of people that I already know. I think it's going to be extremely valuable. Um, I've been doing an experiment I call 100 Days Race to AGI. And what I
Okay.
realized is so much what I do is talk to people, and I've started using an AI to record those conversations, to summarize the action items out of that, all that type of stuff. The dictation has gotten basically perfect, right? From a transcribing voice to text. And there's open source models that can do that locally, right? So I'm not giving all that alpha away. And that's to me one of the best outcomes is we're going to end up keep connecting all these pieces together till I really do have a robust AI that is aligned to me, right? I've posted about this concept of a fiduciary, right? If you know that in the financial or the legal context, like it's somebody that you're their highest, loyalty, right? The AI from Google, it's not accountable to you. It's accountable to making money for Google, right? I ran into this the other day. I was trying to book a doctor's appointment, and I Googled up, where I'd normally go. And I didn't realize they've started shoving ads into Google Maps. And I called the wrong doctor's office and it was in the wrong side of town because I wasn't clicking on the one I thought. I was clicking on the ad, which came
Hmm.
up top. And so it's literally trying to get me to go to the wrong medical provider, right? Because it's incentivized to make that $10 for the doctor's office that paid for the Google AdWords ad to shove it into my feed, right? That to me is fundamentally screwed up. Like, I want an AI that's trying to accomplish things for me, not manipulate me, right? And it's just going to get more and more uh, predatory and manipulative as the AIs get smarter and smarter. I really want a 200 IQ agent that's interacting on my behalf, right? And taking all of those calls, conversations, messaging. Oh, that's phishing. Oh, be careful of that. This is legit. Yeah, that's your friend. And people aren't going to be able to keep up with this wave of agents unless they have a personal AI, any more than anybody can keep up these days without a computer or a phone in a natively digital world.
Interesting. I love that vision. Hey, David, I wanted to kind of switch gears with our, I think we have a couple minutes left. By the way, I'd be down to do this way more often. Yeah, I'm starting
Sure.
to do more content and I just forgot how much I loved connecting with, people of like-mindedness. So take us, maybe finish us off on this note around, and again, I kind of got the sense that maybe you're not so publicly, you don't talk about, your faith all that much. I think it's more of a private thing for you, which I'd respect. But there's this idea of meaning that I think a lot of people are talking about, which is that, oh, in this world where AI and robotics and, a rage of abundance, where everything gets taken care of, where are we left? Like, well, what's the
Mm.
point of us humans being around type of thing? And does that so can you speak to that in the last little bit here? And I don't know if it ties into your faith or not, but I thought you'd be the right guy to ask.
That's a great question. I am I am never shy to say that I am a Christ follower and very, feel it very deeply that that's impacted my life and given it a lot of meaning. It also has created sort of a lot of my worldview from a very young age. Like, what's important? Loving your neighbor. Like, what's important? Creating
Mm.
life, right? And I really hope that we can ground this new technology in those values, right? And I think the best way to do that is connect it to the individual And, over time, those values tend to propagate well, right? People that have sort of, a low value of life don't create a lot of life, right? That kind of filters over time. The humans that exist are the ones that prioritize life, and the societies and civilizations that are productive are love your neighbor civilizations, right? The adversarial ones, they kind of self-implode over time, right? And so, yeah, for me, it's extremely important, and something that I think is sort of coming back. I feel like there was this time in the 90s and the 2000s, atheism was very popular, and it's like, oh, I can dismiss all of these religions, and that was a popular mindset. But I feel, a lot of what people replaced that part of their life with was very destructive, right? It was, you know, it all became about, pleasure and the now, and I'm going to fulfill whatever my desires are. And I've known a lot of friends who were hardcore atheists, and then they came back to me and like, yeah, none of that worked. Like, I was left, addicted and empty, and all these temporary relationships, and all of a sudden now they've got 3 kids and they're married and they're in a totally different place, and they changed their framework. They're like, hey, I realize this thing over here really works, and it's worked for thousands of years for a reason, right? Because I do really think people need purpose and meaning. And I don't think there's a higher purpose than creating life and loving your neighbor and, following those Christ-like examples. So yeah, that's, always happy to talk about that.
Cool. What a beautiful way to end this. I'm gonna keep, my newer episodes a bit on the shorter and sweeter side. And for people who don't know, David was the source of inspiration for Uno Coin, right? By the way, we just had our 12-year anniversary last week. So what a time to be alive. And we're gonna be doing fun things with more and David. And like I said, David would love to do this more often. What a amazing conversation. And thank you and happy holidays. Happy Merry Christmas and all that
Merry
good
Christmas.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Good to see
All
you,
right.
son.
Take care, bud.
All right. Bye.